I think the 3 waiting minutes have gone, and we should start. I'm very happy today to introduce Tek, sitting just here. Tek is from Nepal. He holds a PhD in Agriculture, Environment and Landscape, jointly from St. Anna School of Advanced Studies in Italy and Aarhus University in Denmark. Tek has more than 15 years experience in strategic research in the area of agriculture, climate, interface, and has been with CIMMYT for 7 years. Some of you know Tek, but many of you may not have met him because he has been in Delhi for the last 7 years. And he just moved here 2 weeks ago. Tek is part of CIP, where he is agriculture systems and climate change scientist. He is also CIMMYT's point of contact with CGR on everything related to CCAPs, CRP. Tek is a lead author of the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land, which was just released in August this year. So today Tek will provide us the state of science on what we need to know about climate change and land based on this report. Welcome, Tek.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, all good. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. As Irene said, I was one of the lead authors of this IPCC's Special Report on Climate Change and Land, which was just released in last August 2019. Today, in this presentation, I'm going to present all you need to know about this particular report, mainly focusing on climate change, land, and food security. For those who don't know what IPCC is, IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the world body, one of the UN organizations for assessing state of knowledge about climate change, its impact, its future risk, and the response options for climate change adaptation and mitigation. A little bit of background about the process of this report. As we know that our land is under a constant pressure of increasing human population, and climate change is adding to this pressure. At the same time, meeting the Paris goal of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade is only possible if we can manage to reduce greenhouse gas emission from all the economic sector, including land and food systems. Given this situation, government had asked IPCC to have an overall look into whole land climate systems to see if better land management can be one of the solutions for climate mitigation. IPCC then asked for the nomination from the government and observer organizations. I was nominated by CCAPS, which is Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, as observer organization, and Government of Nepal, my home country government, to serve as lead author in this report. IPCC then made a final list of authors based on the pool of nominations that they have received from the government and the observer organization, and I was lucky to be part of this final list of lead authors to contribute to this important report produced by IPCC. And I'm happy to tell you that over 24 of the CIMMYT publication has been cited in this important report that IPCC has just released. So the official name of this IPCC report is IPCC Special Report on Climate Change, Desertification, Land Degradation, Sustainable Land Management, Food Security, and Greenhouse Gas Fluxes in Terrestrial Ecosystem. And it is certain as IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. So this is one of the 3 special reports that IPCC is producing over this 6th assessment reporting cycle, one on 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is already released, one on climate change and land, which was just released in August this year, and one on ocean and cryosphere is coming very soon. Over 2 years in making, this important report on climate change and land makes a holistic assessment of how climate change is affecting our land system and food system, and how the way that we are managing our land and food system may affect climate change. So to give a little bit of the level of efforts that is required to produce each of these IPCC report, this particular report on climate change and land was prepared by 107 scientists coming from 52 different countries all over the world. And on top of that, 97 contributing authors were also recruited during different stages of the report preparation. 40% of these authors, coordinating lead authors, were female, which was very good, and 53% of the authors, total authors, were coming from developing countries. In this report, we assess over 7,000 scientific publications, and we have received 28,275 review comments from the expert reviewers and governments, which we had addressed during finalization of this report. So today I'm going to summarize the state of the science on land and livelihood interactions, the effect of climate change on land and food system, and how the management of land and food system can be part of this climate solutions. Now coming to the land and livelihood, we all know that the land is a critical resource on which we rely on for food, water, health, and well-being, but our land is under immense pressure of increasing human population. The way that we produce our food and the way that we eat our food, for example, inefficient way of production or overconsumption of the food that has higher environmental footprint, together with less options that we have left for afforestation or bioenergy crops, are adding to these pressures. Let me highlight the increasing pressure on land and fresh water that human is inducing. So the figure on the left, you can see that total population, prevalence of overweight and obese people, and total calorie consumption per capita as compared relative to the 1961 values has always increased over time, as you can see from here. And in response, as you can see from the right figure over here, total crop production, consumption of fertilizer and water, and the total number of livestock has also increased relative to the value in 1961 over the time. So despite this increase in food production, there are still over 800 million people who are still malnourished in this world. So this is the challenging situation that we are having. And climate change is making this challenging situation even worse and undermining food security. How? Because the prolonged drought, increased temperature, flood, and extreme events that leads to the water scarcity, prolonged drought period, or wildfire damage, or permafrost thaw, and also leads to the failure of many crop and livestock in many cases. These processes also lead to desertification and land degradation, which ultimately reduces the crop and livestock yield in the long term. Although in some of the parts in the world may benefit from the warmer climate, if we look at globally, climate change ultimately is projected to reduce food production, increase the food prices, reduce the nutritional quality of food, and increase and disturb the food supply chain, thus undermining the food security. Before going to the detailed examples of how climate change is going to undermine food security, let's come to the definition of food security so that we all understand what, at the same level, by what food security means. According to FAO, food security is a situation when all people at all time have a physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences in order to live active and healthy life. So this is what food security has been defined, and we have also adopted this definition of food security in this particular report. Therefore, Availability of food, its utilization, access, and stability are the component of the food system we have analyzed. So let's see how climate change is affecting food security. It affects food security because climate system and food system interact in a complex way, as shown in this figure, for example. Let's start with the food system component with the bigger circle over here. The component of the food system involve production and supply of the food, its marketing, transport, and processing, and consumption of the food, and management of food loss and food waste. And these are the component of food system. And the way that we manage each of these components of food system has a direct bearing with the availability, access, utilization, and stability of the food that affects food security. And the component of the climate system on the top, for example, the temperature, precipitation, or occurrence of the extreme event, for example, it affects all the component of the food system here, both positively as well as negatively. And the way we manage this component of the food system over here not only contribute to food security, they also help adapting to the climate change as well as mitigation of the climate change. So there is a complex interaction between climate system and food system. Here is the example of how climate change affects the different component of food security. As we all know that availability, utilization, access, and stability are the component of the food security, and how different component of the climate change are going to affect this component of food security. Climate change is going to affect availability of the food by reducing the crop and livestock yield. We all know that. It increases the heat and drought stress to both crops and as well as livestock. It shortens the growing period of the crops. It reduces the green filling period as well as it induces terminal heat to the crop. It induces land degradation and desertification, reduces the fertility of the soil, and that ultimately reduces the crop yield. In many cases, it also induces crop failure. It also causes higher pre-harvest loss of the crop due to pest and disease attack, and so on. It affects utilization component of the food security because it decreases the nutritional quality of food due to increased temperature or moisture. It increases mycotoxin, one of the fungal infection in the food due to higher temperature and moisture. It reduces the water quality and quantity to prepare the food, and also causes high post-harvest losses both in quality as well as quantity. Climate change affects the access of the food because low yield or sporadic crop failure is directly related to the increase in the price of the food that will affect the access of the food by many people. Loss of agricultural income by reducing the crop yield or crop failure means that the purchasing capacity of the farming household is also reduced. That affects directly the access of the food, and it also disrupts the food supply in many due to many climate-induced events like flood or extreme events or hurricanes or so on. So stability is also affected by the yield variability or fluctuation in yield price, etc., etc. For example, the drought occurrence in Argentina in 2018, it led to the reduction of the corn and soybean yield by 20 to 30%. That increased the price of corn and soybean by about 15%. So that would directly affect the access and stability of the food. So here I'm going to present you the effect of the change in global mean surface temperature relative to pre-industrial level on the different processes related to desertification, such as water scarcity, the processes related to the land degradation, such as soil erosion, vegetation loss, wildfire damage, and permafrost degradation, as shown by the subsequent bars here, and the processes related to food security, tropical crop yield failure, and food supply instabilities. So y-axis, change in temperature, global mean temperature relative to pre-industrial level, and its effect on these processes over here. And this effect are color-coded. Yellow color means moderate effect, red color means high effect, and pink color means extreme effect. And the letter L, M, and S refers to the level of confidence of the transition, low, medium, or high level of confidence. And the effect on these processes also drive the risk in the different systems, such as food system, livelihood, or human and ecosystem health, value of land and infrastructure, which is denoted by the dots over here, just below each respective bar over here. So the effect of the climate increased temperature on the water scarcity would have effect on all these systems over here as shown by the graph. So the key message coming out of this figure is that even if we are able to meet the Paris Agreement, that we were able to keep the global warming just below 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial level, still the risk from wildfire damage, permafrost thaw, and food supply instabilities are projected to be high. If the global temperature rises at around 3 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial level, then the risk from the water scarcity, vegetation loss, wildfire damage, permafrost degradation, and food supply instabilities are projected to be very high. Here I'm going to present the effect on the crop yield of the major crop wheat, rice, maize, and soybean due to each degree centigrade of temperature increase. On the y-axis, it is a percentage crop loss per degree of temperature increase by different methods. These circles and corresponding error bars is based on the individual methods like grid simulation or point-based simulation, observation from the warming experiment, or regression at a country level and global level. Regression B is regression at a global level. And the field bar is the mean of all this multi-method ensemble. So I would ask you to look at the mean of these bars only over here. So for each degree centigrade increase in temperature, there is a projected crop yield loss from 4 to 8% for different crops. The crop like rice and soybean are projected to have a yield decline by about 4% for each degree centigrade temperature increase, whereas crop like wheat and maize, the yield decline would be is projected to be 6 to 8% per degree of temperature increase. So these are the effect of climate change on land and food security. Let's come to see what food security and land management does in climate change. So agriculture, food production, and deforestation are major contributors of climate change. Based on the recent assessment in this report, agriculture, forestry, and other land use systems are responsible for one quarter of the total greenhouse gas, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. And if we see the food system, which involves not only production and supply, but also processing and transport, consumption, and management of food loss and waste, this whole food system is responsible for about 1/3 of total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. Here I want to present all this number in all this figure again in terms of numbers. So this is 52 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year is total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission that we have in this world. And out of this, FLO sector is responsible for about 12 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, whereas total food system is responsible for 10 to 19 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year. So let me put this number in perspective. So the total food system emission of 10 to 19 gigaton per hectare is equivalent to about 25 to 44 billion barrel of fossil fuel burning. And if we assume on an average, one car runs about 10,000 kilometers per year and consumes about 1,000 liters of gas per year, this is equivalent to keeping 4 to 7 billion cars off the road. So this is the magnitude of emission that we are talking about in the whole food system. So this is the magnitude of emission. So let's see how is the trend over the time. If you see the agricultural emission relative to the values in 1961, so you can see that the net emission of CO2, CS4, as well as nitrous oxide, methane, and carbon dioxide, they are all increasing over time. So it is very important that we should keep this constant or even try to reduce, make a negative emission in order for us to have a Paris Agreement realized. So these are the effect of land system. Let's come to the solution. Is there any hope? Is there a possible way that better land management can be part of the climate solutions? Yes, land and food system management can be part of the solutions, not only to tackle climate change, but also to tackle food security, nutrition, poverty, and hunger. So the land-based solutions to tackle climate change and food security can be broadly categorized into 4 categories. They are avoiding, reducing, and reversing deforestation, land degradation, and desertification, improving the efficiency of food production through more productive use of land, water, nutrient, and other productive resources, consumption of the healthy and sustainable diets, and minimization of high environmental footprint foods such as animal-based diets, and minimizing food loss and waste. So in my subsequent slides, I will try to present you some of the concrete actions that we may have to take under each of these 4 categories. So in terms of avoiding, reducing, and reversing deforestation, land degradation, and desertification, we should focus on, first, we should focus on the high carbon ecosystem, such as conservation of wetland, wetland, rangeland, mangroves, and forest. Activities such as micro-irrigation, restoring degraded land, ecosystem restoration program, or afforestation, for example, building green walls to reduce the dust storm, can also contribute to reduce desertification and land degradation. These activities would also enhance soil fertility, increase carbon storage in the soil and biome, while also benefiting agricultural productivity and food security. The way that we produce our food also matters. The key is to ensure the productive use of land, water, and other productive resources. And there are a lot of practices that make our production system not only climate efficient, but also very productive. Some of these are improved fertilizer management, improved crop management, including conservation agriculture, improved water management, genetic improvement of the both crop as well as livestock for high yield, tolerance, climate change adaptation, and low greenhouse gas emission, improving grazing land management and manure management, improving the food quality, diversification of the food system, and diversification has to be based on the local food system and the local agroclimatic condition. And the mitigation potential of all these better food production system management would range from 1.5 to 4 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year, which is equivalent to keeping about 500 to 1400 million cars off the road per year. And the good thing is most of these response options also provide both adaptation as well as mitigation benefit besides its contribution to food security. And I want you to highlight some of the practices that we do here in CIMMYT, for example, under crop management practices. And some of them are, for example, very small font over here. So increase soil, any practices that we do to increase soil organic matter, increasing the crop diversity and breeding for the better tolerance and adaptation capacity, improve water management, improve fertilizer management, tillage and crop establishment, residue management. These are the practices that we are doing here in CIMMYT, and they are not only contributing to food security, but they are also contributing to climate change adaptation as well as mitigation. And as I told you that, because we are doing this work and then we have published all this work, a lot of this work has also been cited in this important report. Dietary choices can help reduce the emission and reduce pressure on the land. That's because some diets require more land and more water and more resources than other diets. For example, plant-based diets require more resources to produce per calorie than animal-based diets, for example. Therefore, a move towards more balanced diet made of higher proportion of the coarse grain, pulses, fruits and vegetables, and nuts and seeds, and low consumption of the energy-intensive animal-based diets not only helps in climate change mitigation, but also it has other associated health benefits. And the technical mitigation potential of changing diet globally is, it ranges from 2.7 to 6.4 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, which is equivalent to keeping 1 to 2 billion cars off the road per year. So, but changing diet is also, it has some limitation because it has some implications. It has to be done based on the cultural food habit as well as the production system. It's not that easy to change the diet from animal-based to plant-based all of a sudden, but it has to go gradually and so on. Let me compare here. Let me give the comparison of the environmental impact and nutritional value of the plant-based and animal-based food over here. So this is, I'm comparing the 4-ounce burger prepared by Beyond Burger, which looks like a meat burger and tastes like meat burger and satisfy like meat burger. That's what they say. And the beef. And the beef burger of the equal size. And you can see the environmental footprint here, that producing the same amount of burger, plant-based burger, would require 90% less water, 90% less land, and it consumes about 50% less energy. It produces about 90% less greenhouse gas emission as compared to the same size of meat burger. And at the same time, it is giving more or less, I mean, equal or even in some cases higher calories or nutritional values as compared to meat burger. So this is the time we should think where we want to go. Minimizing food loss and waste offers a great opportunity for climate change mitigation, because food loss and waste are associated with the release of 8 to 10% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. And the statistics shows that about 25 to 30% of the global food produced is lost during production and supply or wasted during consumption. So this loss and waste not only lowers the income to the producers, but also increases prices to the consumers because of the low yield, and also leads to unsustainable use of the natural resources. There are two ways for minimizing food loss and waste: technical method and non-technical method. Technical method would be to improve the harvesting system, to improve the storage system and infrastructure to keep the food fresh for the longer time. Whereas non-technical method would be to change in our attitude and behavior, not to waste the food while eating, for example, or redistribution of the food from the food surplus area to food deficit area. And the technical mitigation potential of minimizing food loss and waste would range from 1.9 to 2.5 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, which is equivalent to keeping 700 to 900 million cars off the road per year. So with this, I would like to end my presentation with this take-home message over here. So we all know that keeping warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade is stipulated under Paris Agreement is only possible by reducing emission from all the sectors of economy. This is not new. But the focus in the past has always been on energy, transportation, and industry only. This special report on, of IPCC on climate change and land shows that the better land management can also be part of the climate solutions, and it can be, the Paris goal cannot be achieved if we don't act on the land management as well. So increasing productivity through improving efficiency of land, water, nutrient, and other productive resources is more important. And many of these land-based resources to climate change can also combat desertification and degradation and enhance food security and contribute to many of the sustainable development goals. And the good thing is many of these solutions are already there. We don't have to do a lot of research for invention. All we need to do is scale out and scale up to the area where it has not been taken up. Therefore, the policies that support sustainable land management, ensuring food supply to the vulnerable communities, and to keep the carbon in the ground while reducing greenhouse gas emission are very important to meet this Paris target. So if these are too many take-home messages, I would ask you to take these 3 messages home. So land is under the growing human pressure. Land is part of the climate solutions, but there is a limit that land can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tek. Now we will take questions, comments from you.
Please, Martin.
Great presentation, thank you. And this is super important, so I'm very proud also that 7 people are contributing to those high-level reports, and in the end, we get down in negotiations, finally, agriculture also in there, although we still have to fight on this, right?
Yeah.
I was just at 2 high-level meetings in Africa, and step by step it starts coming in. Now, in terms of the technical things, because to be honest, for policy making, the precision that we as scientists look at are not always that important for them, but for us they are. And what we see with climate change studies, that from the, I'm a little bit older, right? So from the early 1990s, we saw already that predictions that were made are really happening now. Because my first book on climate change was in 1993, and the predictions on those days is exactly what's happening now today already. Right. So this is serious business, and it's good that we have the science back there. Now, one thing that triggered me, because people like to connect everything, you indicate there that healthy food also helps in mitigation.
Yes.
Now, when you talk about the burgers, that's one thing, but what we have to be very careful there, because you must have a table also where you see for the different types of crops what their contribution is per kg of dry matter or per calorie. And there must be a huge difference even between crops. Do you have that table?
Yes, we have a table, and we have a big figure also, because it would be a little bit concentrated. So, and there is also one report that WRI has just published comparing all the food sources, and the beef is coming on the top of everything anywhere. It comes all the time.
What
beef.
comes on top? Beef, yeah,
Beef,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
So basically, it has been proven that some sources of food that requires more land, more water, and more resources, and emit more greenhouse gas emission as compared to other sources, for example. So I compared that beef. So it was the study done by Beyond Burger. I think they might have bias towards then on product also to some extent. I don't know, but even independent assessment of the environmental footprint of the different foods has been already published in many reports, including this IPCC report. And red meat are emission intensive food that we know, and it is not that easy to change from meat eating culture to go to vegetarian all of a sudden. But all I'm saying is maybe we can do that, instead of 3 times of meat in a week, we can go for 2 times in a week or something like that. So I'm presenting this as a caution, because it is not that easy, and there are also other implications of moving from animal-based to plant-based, for example. There are a lot of farmers that are depending, who are depending on livestock for their livelihood, for example. So we cannot, we cannot undermine their livelihood as well.
But for the animals versus crops, we all know, right? For a long time, it is huge. But among the crops, in my opinion, what I've seen in literature, when you have a very efficient crop of wheat and maize, then you're among the crops that are the most efficient and the most, in terms of the least production of carbon dioxide per kg of crop. Is that correct? Or am I wrong?
Yeah. So basically, upland crops like wheat, soybean, they are the least carbon-intensive crop. Even within a crop, for example, compared to rice, this crop, maize, wheat, and soybean, this upland crop would be less carbon-intensive.
Can I have some of those data for my presentations as well?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of discussions about health and things, and this is an important element also to show how important wheat and maize are, not just for food, but also in terms of climate change. Sure. And then the other thing, because I showed slides of Diego and a lot of colleagues on wheat. Some very detailed simulations. I don't know if you've seen them. But when you showed that table, the effect of climate change, that's global, I think, that wheat is negatively affected by climate change. That's a global average. You have one of those slides where you see the effect of climate change on wheat and rice and maize.
Oh, yeah. Okay, not a table, but figure, right?
Yeah, a figure. Bars. Because what I liked about Diego's simulations, and I saw it from my rice simulations some time ago, is that it is so region-specific. Like, for example, in Europe, they like climate change because the yields go up, it's wonderful. But in the areas where it matters, Africa, India, Asia, where all the population growth is coming, where we have already hungry people, that's exactly where it hits negatively. So in your simulation, you have minus 1.6% globally, right, in wheat? 1.9%, I was close. But in Africa and in some of the India and so on, and Mexico as well, it was minus 20, 25?
Minus 20 up to, yeah, minus 25.
Uh-huh.
We average, but it goes on up to minus 40 in some locations.
So I think, is that also in the report?
Yeah.
Because this is crucial, right? So where it matters,
Right.
it hits the most.
Yeah, but it might be, this is effect per degree of temperature increase, and then if your simulation, Diego, is for the total climate change that has been projected, that might have projected, for example, 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade, then it would be double, for example.
Oh, but this is up to now.
No, this is per degree centigrade
Per
increase
degree.
in temperature.
Per degree Celsius. This one.
Sorry, my glasses are good, but...
Yeah, this.
Yeah, this is rate of change per degree centigrade increase in temperature.
Yeah, and
Okay,
also.
okay.
Yeah.
And also this, I think, is just taking into account temperature or also CO2 as well.
Oh, this is.
This one is just
this
temperature,
is
right?
just temperature, yeah.
Okay, so that's the difference. I take into account CO2 as well. So it counterbalance
Yeah.
to 1.9.
Other comments? Questions? Tek?
Olaf.
Thanks, Tek, for the presentation. My understanding, it's mainly a review exercise, no? I mean, you have a lot of experts and a lot of literature to go through, but to what extent are you also looking into some of the dynamic and interrelationships between the different aspects? I mean, you picked up on, okay, food wastage is a problem or a potential solution, reducing that. At the same time, increasing temperatures are likely to increase the loss of food loss, yeah, in terms of insect damage, etc.
Mhm.
Land use change, yeah, has implications. At the same time, climate change is going to maybe exacerbate deforestation, etc. At least that's. So how do you take into account some of those interdynamic aspects, yeah? In terms of, in some ways, yeah, you pick up a lot of issues, but at the same time, it feels like a static exercise, whereas there may be some vicious spirals that may take things out of control.
It's a very good question. In fact, yes, you pointed it right. So IPCC does not do the research on its own. It just assesses the available resources by having scientists from different backgrounds. So yes, there might be these interlinkages from one system to another system, for example, which we have not assessed in this report, for example, but as the literature becomes more and more available, because if there are only 2 or 3 publications saying something like this, with some not very high level of confidence, then maybe IPCC would, at the end, while summarizing everything, would say that okay, this is not at the level of presenting that as a medium level of confidence or medium level of agreement or something like that. That's how it is not coming as of now. But you're right. So that kind of interrelationship would be very interesting thing to see upon. Please.
I have a couple of questions.
It goes automatic, I think.
Automatic. It's automatic.
It's on.
Yes, just a couple of questions. The first one, we're talking about beef, but I saw on your slide when you were pointing out the increase, I think maybe since 1960 to the current date, in terms of livestock, and it was only 70% compared to 700% for fertilizer nitrogen. I think something like that. Is that correct? Or number 4, total number of ruminant livestock?
Yeah, this is.
About 70%. It's not all that great, is it?
Yeah, it is not that great. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, a lot of this emphasis about stopping eating beef, if we've been eating beef for the last 60, 50 years. So I just query this extra emphasis on beef. Another query I have in terms of what you have been doing. Have you looked at the change of cropping in location over time? so that farmers, okay, it's 1.5 degrees too hot for this crop, but they themselves change to other crops to try to adapt. Is that something that you're looking at as well?
Yeah, that,
And the third one is you gave a figure of 10 to 19 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And that's a tremendous range, that's 100% range. Why such a range? And if you give that to people, they say, well, we go to the low side, 10, or we go to the high side, 19. Why was that range there?
okay, so your first question on the crop production has increased so much, but our inorganic consumption of fertilizer has been increased by so many percentage as compared to the less increment in livestock, and why is still blaming on beef, for example, right? That's what your question is. But I think on the subsistence livelihood also there were crop, but nitrogen fertilizer was not there. So crop and livestock were the integral part of the livelihood anyway. So that way, I think I don't know whether I can comment too much. I think it's just that the comment on shifting from the animal-based diets to plant-based diets is based on the current level of carbon footprint, not by seeing what was the contribution of livestock versus crop back in 1961 versus right now. I forgot your second question, but third question I'll come to you. Why this range from 10 to 19 gigaton of CO2 equivalent? Because there are different scenarios that we use to evaluate. For example, what percentage of the food loss and waste that you can manage by having some optimistic and moderate or aggressive scenario, right? And you cannot bring food loss and waste down to zero because there are different actors involved in managing food in different components. For example, some loss would be occurring at the time of harvesting, pre-harvest. Some loss would be occurring during transportation and supply. Some loss would be occurring during the processing time, and then there would be also food loss, food wasted during consumption, and so on, right? So this 25 to 30% of food loss and waste is addition of the different percentage that is coming from different stages, and then it adds up. So you cannot bring everything down to zero. And there are different scenarios that, okay, if you can bring this from 10% to 5% loss, from 5% to 2% loss, or something like that, that's how these ranges come.
And the other one was about whether you've got any evidence for change of crops in locations with time as a farm adaptation to.
Oh, there are a lot of evidences of shifting in the cropping season as well as shifting in the crop. For example, being crop grown in the area where that crop was not suitable in the past, for example. But the decline in the crop yield or increase in the price, that has been projected at a global level, in fact. Also considering those shifting in the cropping season and growing the crop in the places where it was not grown in the past.
Maybe we can talk about.
Sure.
Okay, so it's coming from a family that's of beef producers in the United States. I know it doesn't show in there, we have quite a bit. So I saw something contradictory, because there was one point about losing rangeland and grasslands leading to carbon release, and then you have to say we don't eat beef, but beef is on grassland, right? So why isn't the discussion more on more sustainable beef production? Maybe silvo pastures, other systems that would be less carbon producing, but we can still consume beef.
That's a very good question. In fact, there has been a lot of discussion and a lot of figures also on sustainable livestock production. So how we can make, that's on a supply side mitigation, and this is on demand side mitigation. So it was estimated in both ways, in fact. We are not undermining the importance of sustainable beef production, and then when we are saying dietary change can be part of the solutions with this number and that number, we are also giving due consideration onto the cultural food habit and the production system and the livelihood of those who are depending on livestock for their livelihood.
Yeah, maybe, when was this written? Was this before or after the EAT report came out, the EAT Lancet report?
Oh, it came after the EAT Lancet report.
So did you include those stories as well?
Yes.
Now, one thing I'm interested in, because I'm eating whole grains, right? And so when they started talking about this, I didn't know what they meant, to be honest. And many of us, we had a discussion with several people. But did you include studies on what it means if people start changing their diet from white flour to basically whole grain approaches and things? Does it make any effect?
It would. I don't think that we have included that one in this report, but it would to some extent, at least for health. And but I don't remember if we have done that assessment from the climate mitigation point of view.
It might be interesting just
Yeah.
to study that a little bit, because people talk about things and I think often they don't know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. Comments? Questions? Right. Let us thank Tek again for this interesting presentation.
Very good. Might be interesting just to study. Huh?